You do a call to order?
Yes, we just,
Roll call, sorry.
roll call, thank you. Erickson,
Here.
Densford is absent. Gorski,
Here.
Commissioner Gutenkauf is absent. Kabasco is absent. Walensky, Perry,
Here.
and Suffern.
Here.
Thank you, 5, for coming to the meeting. We do have a quorum.
All right, so we have, next up on the agenda is the approval of the July 8th meeting minutes. Any questions?
No answers. A motion to approve?
Motion to approve, anyone second the motion?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. We had Joe and then Bob.
What do we have?
Andy. I knew it was.
All right, let's move on to public comment. Any public comment? All right, let's go into the meat of everything. Tony, can you give us the update on the Lake Street TIF?
Yes, I'd be glad to, and thank you 5 for coming tonight, so we can go over quickly some elements of this big economic development project. Just by way of introduction, so for month after month, year after year over here, we talk about redeveloping the downtown and attracting big business into Brewster Creek Business Park and prominent intersections along Route 59, like 59 in Stearns, and new development along West Bartlett Road. And one area that we haven't addressed a whole lot over the years is this stretch of Lake Street. Now, I should mention also Lake Street and 59. We talked about and planned and looked to attract development there for many years, where the auto dealerships are now located. So this particular stretch of Lake Street, meanwhile, has stagnated. And what I'm going to go over tonight are the parameters of the Lake Street TIF, the Lake Street Corridor TIF, we call it. So we use that acronym a lot. You just kind of crack open the newspaper and you see things about TIF projects in other towns. We've talked about TIFs here quite a bit. It's a public financing method used as a subsidy or helps to support redevelopment, infrastructure improvements, and other community improvement projects. Having been an economic development professional now for 24 years, I can attest that it really is the most powerful economic development tool in the toolbox. We use other things over the years, sales tax rebates and fee waivers. Cook County has some property tax abatements that are powerful incentives for really large industrial projects. But for the most part, when you're looking to make a meaningful impact along a corridor or a downtown business district, or convert a gigantic gravel quarry into a business park with over 5 million square feet of industrial, really it's the most powerful tool that I'm aware of in economic development. As part of this presentation, I went on the comptroller's website. TIF districts are registered for the state, so it's not really a totally unique thing for us. Almost 1,500 TIF districts in Illinois and over 500 municipalities. Sometimes you find a big town like Aurora has like 8 TIFs, or Chicago probably has like hundreds. So there's it's commonly used. Bartlett has 2 active TIFs and 2 closed TIFs. The original TIF was where we're sitting, downtown, 1986 through 2010. The other TIF, one of the most successful TIFs in the state, just concluded about a year ago. It's actually called the Bartlett Quarry TIF, but we all call it the Brewster Creek Business Park TIF. There's a TIF district at 59 and Lake Street that's kind of winding up in 2027. And we have a TIF we call the Bluff City TIF, that comprises Blue Heron Business Park and Bluff City on the western edge of town in Kane County. So we had 2 that are closed and 2 that are active. And forgive me, some of these slides will kind of repeat the language a little bit, but it is to stimulate private investment in blighted or undeveloped areas, using the future increases in property taxes revenues to finance current improvements. So here's a handy-dandy slide that is used in almost every TIF presentation you'll ever see. This comes straight from our TIF consultants, Tesca, and it's just kind of a visual depiction of the base EAV over there on the left side, where it's the day that once the TIF is formed, the village authorities inform the county authorities, taxing authorities, assessors, to freeze the tax base at whatever level it is at that point. As the EAV increases over the years, that's where the I in TIF comes from. The increment is put into a separate fund that can be dedicated and spent for redevelopment costs. And it can, the TIF, the TIF ordinance for the state is over 100 pages long and details many different uses for it and things that you can't use it for. But it can go from mostly for public improvements to help support private development. It can help pay for some private costs, but not the brick and mortar of a building. For those of you who've been around the EDC for a while, recall we had a TIF rebate program that helped with that type of thing years ago for the downtown. The Lake Street Corridor Redevelopment Plan, this is like the very broad overview, is to transform the Lake Street Corridor into a vibrant, economically thriving area. And the key elements are to improve commercial and mixed-use areas, upgrade infrastructure, and attract private investment. Here you see one of the blighted and empty and dilapidated buildings in the TIF, proposed TIF, I should say, that helps contribute to it. That's the former gas station. And the boundaries consist roughly of 154 acres along Lake Street. And the key characteristics are a mix of commercial, residential, and vacant properties, including areas with significant blight and underutilization. When I say residential, really, there's not residential within the existing TIF. There will be some areas that could be residential in the future in it. So here's the project boundary, arrived at through a series of meetings with village staff and with our TIF consultants. As I mentioned, they're Tesca. I should also mention Tesca has been the TIF consultant for all of Bartlett's TIFs, including the original. We have somebody who's our lead TIF consultant on this, who was the TIF consultant on the 1986 downtown TIF. So he knows our village very well. His name's Lee Brown. This area is the proposed TIF boundary, and you can see, I'm not going to go over every single property in it, but you can see that there's a school, actually 2 schools in it. There's the middle school, and then there's a school annex towards the rear of that property. That strip that you see, of course, along Oak Avenue and 20 is Oakfield Center, kind of an older strip retail center there, and they have an outlet building as well. Further to the east, you see the properties we've talked about here a few times. We call the triangle properties. They, I know we talked about doing this TIF probably 4 or 5 months ago. I mentioned that it was, I don't want to use the word delay, but we wanted to bring the triangle property into the village. and become part of the TIF. So it took a few months, and it was annexed into the village, I would guess, about 2 months ago, maybe 2 or 3 months ago. So that's part of the TIF. Crest Motel's in it. You go north, on the north side, you see the old gas station there. So when you see structures, there's 13 structures, a few little houses, but used for commercial uses, ESP readers and whatnot. And you see a lot of the greenish area is unimproved, meaning nothing has been built over there. And it's described as located along Lake Street, roughly between Leela Lane and Hale Avenue. So when you do a TIF study and you hire consultants, and I mentioned that the state TIF legislation has a very descriptive list of criteria that must be met for an area to qualify as a tax increment financing district. And this area, I'll just tell you, generally qualified fairly easily based on factors like deterioration, excessive vacancies, decline in assessed value, and environmental contamination. The area met the statutory requirements for TIF designation as both a conservation area and a blighted area. Blighted area requires a few more of those factors. And conservation area, by the way, is kind of a misleading name. I don't like the name, but it basically reflects the ages of the properties. It's not like a historic area. It's like trying to revive an area, more like they found that 92, so going back one slide, it said there were 13 structures. 12 out of the 13 were 35 years or older. So that's conservation area more has to do with the age of buildings and deterioration, illegal uses of buildings, abandonment, things like that. The language to qualify something as blighted has a lot of terminology like that in it. So there you go. That's the next one. Here's how it meets the eligibility requirements. Meets the requirements to qualify as a blighted area. I know people don't always like to hear that word blight, but this does qualify as a blighted area in terms of the age of the buildings, dilapidation and deterioration, which are kind of similar in nature, excessive vacancies, which that area obviously has a very high vacancy rate, decline in EAV. That's something that the consultants go out and study parcel by parcel. So that's less of a subjective thing like taking pictures of abandoned buildings, and that's actually documenting a decline in EAV. And I want to pause on that for 1 minute too, because we've been talking about so much new projects are in the downtown, so many new projects in Brewster Creek Business Park, so many new projects in Blue Heron. Most of the village, 95+% of the village, has been rising in EAV year after year. Particularly the downtown area with the new grocery store and with more brewing and all these new restaurants. But this area has, the EAV has been in decline for at least 3 out of the last 5 years. Lack of community planning too sometimes doesn't sound great, but I want to explain that as well. So this is all deep. By the way, we have a 53-page TIF study I sent you all a link to that goes into greater detail with this. And the way the TIF consultants describe this factor were twofold. One of them is they call it state highway 1950s and 60s type development with strip centers and motels, little houses that serve as commercial. So it was mostly developed 50, 60 years ago for that type of development before the rest of Bartlett really fully developed. And the other half of it being that, just like I mentioned, the recent annexation of the triangle piece, I didn't know this, but I learned it in the TIF study, that most of these properties developed prior to being incorporated into Bartlett. So like the hotel wasn't necessarily built when it was in Bartlett. So a lot of the properties were annexed over the years. Piecemeal development, in other words, property by property. The unimproved land qualify as blighted, obsolete, well, missed an L in there, not obsolete padding, but platting. Deterioration of structures and site improvements in neighboring areas, and as I mentioned, the decline in EAV. So they have to be present in a meaningful extent, and they are. The goals, again, I've been over this kind of enhancing the infrastructure, attracting private investment, increasing property values, revitalizing the area, creating new jobs. I'm going to do another side note on this, that by statute, the village mailed out notices of this TIF to surrounding property owners around the entire 154 acres. So over 700 letters went out bearing my name and contact with any questions for the TIF. As you might imagine, when they first hit the mailboxes, I was getting a dozen calls or more a day for about the first week. This borders Streamwood, so also we mailed to a lot of Streamwood residents. And the only reason I point this out is when I talk about increasing property values and improving the quality of life, people, obviously, even when you're doing economic development, a lot of people don't know all about what TIFs are, and there's a lot of questions when they get something like that, saying there's going to be a TIF in their area. And when I explained, and when Scott explains that we're trying to improve an entire corridor, we mentioned the empty gas station, we mentioned the empty hot dog stand, people go, oh, okay, now I know what you're talking about. So when you're out there, if any of your neighbors or colleagues or friends ask you about what's going on, I hear about this TIF. I mean, it's kind of a general answer, but that's the answer I've been giving people. We want to attract nice development to the area that looks like something you would see along West Bartlett Road or along Stearns Road or the downtown. We want that for the Lake Street corridor as well. When I tell them that, it's easily understood. This is the future land use plan. And again, this is something that's proposed in the TIF plan. So it's not quite finalized yet, but again, this was from a mixture of meetings with staff and the consultants mostly, going over area by area. And you can see the big blue institutional is the school area. You can see that mostly that pinkish area we call mixed use, predominantly commercial. We call it, really are planning for commercial and call it mixed use, so there's a little bit of flexibility there. Maybe there will be some mixed use buildings at some point. And then you see on the eastern and western edge of it would allow for some residential use, multifamily residential possibly.
Tony, could I ask a question?
Yes.
The property that's part of Eastview, part of U46,
Yeah.
along Lake Street there, in one of your other maps, it showed it part of the Eastview property.
Right.
On this map, it shows it for development. Does that mean that U46 is selling that property, or?
Oh, that's a good question. It's not for development at all. When this says institutional, it's going to remain institutional. And U46, some of our staff has met with them to apprise them of what this is. Of course, they're tax exempt, but in theory, they could benefit from some improvements, including their own type of TIF rebate in the future. They are not selling it as a development site, not whatsoever.
So shouldn't the blue go all the way to Lake Street then?
No, there's some frontage with it that if you, well, let's see, let's go back. Yeah, see how
Right.
yeah, it doesn't, their property doesn't go all the way to Lake Street. There's commercial along Lake Street there, like I mentioned, those triangle properties and Oakfield Center. So the institutional, you see where that box is there with the two schools on it? That's what's reflected basically in this plan, and a little bit across the street.
I also have a question. And can you go back to the slide that you just had, please? So that white line that's east of the Learning Center, that lines up with Crest, and I'm curious if your thought is that the street would now go through all the way to Lake Street. I mean, is that because a road is going to be built there?
No,
Or
that's,
is that just
that's
boxing
just,
it in?
they own that, that's just another PIN number.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was just thinking,
Yeah.
if you were going to build on there, because I didn't understand, and Bruce got to my question before, before I did. So I wasn't quite sure if things were going to be developed behind the school, based on the fact that, you're right, it's tax exempt, so what does the TIF do for them? So,
Well, you're right. The village brought, and our consultants brought the school into the TIF for contiguity,
okay,
okay? TIFs have to be contiguous, and we wanted to go east of the TIF. And even prior to those properties being annexed in, even with them annexed in, to go further east of there, it was brought in to be contiguous. That's the only reason the school's in it. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of meetings and background things go into this. And our administrator has met with the school district. They're well aware of this. And they're a member of the Joint Review Board that'll be meeting this Friday.
Tony, on the far right there, the far east,
Yeah.
on the north side of Lake Street, there's a little triangle.
Yeah.
What's there now on that little parcel, and why is that part of the TIF?
That's part of the tip. I don't know its entire history. I know there was actually, we're always talking about gas stations. There was going to be a gas station built over there, and that area is actually planned. I'm going to go zap here again to be, the bright red is for commercial. To be honest, that was another area that we feel might end up becoming a gas station. But maybe
so your
something.
question is vacant right now?
Yeah, vacant,
Okay.
yeah. Commercial, like I said, commercial development, mixed-use buildings and infrastructure improvements. We're going to identify sites, high-potential redevelopment sites, including vacant and utilized properties. And there's my photo I took a few weeks ago of the hot dog stand that we've talked about so many times. Eligible project costs, this is, before you look at this huge number and go, oh my goodness, TIFs are planned for 23 years, and they're estimates. So there could end up being $40 million of redevelopment over the years. There could be 30, there could be 80. Nobody really knows at this point. All the TIFs start off with budgets where you try to prognosticate how much development could happen, how it would be paid for, and they arrive to this number. And even you see financing costs. There may or may not be financing costs, but that kind of reflects the way, say, like almost a miniature Brewster Creek Business Park TIF in a way. So this is, the 67 million is like all in, how much it could possibly, how much investment total could be in the entire TIF area.
Could I ask another question?
Yes.
Would you go back to that other one? The rehabilitation, reconstruction, repair, remodeling, there aren't that many buildings. Is the $12 million, does that include a lot to do something with the gas station? Is that an expensive parcel to rehabilitate the gas station that's been sitting there for 10 years?
Yes, it would, well, obviously, the gas station would be kind of a small portion of that. That would include Oakfield Center, that would include what we call the Triangle properties.
Is that a super fund, that gas station?
It's not. At this point, it's just an abandoned, dilapidated
So it's
property,
tanks
probably with some
So
contamination.
the tanks aren't leaking and the soil is,
You know, without getting too deep into any one property, Commissioner Suffern, that it's privately owned. I would use the term that it's been abandoned. The taxes have been sold the last 5 years. The village doesn't own it, so we're not in possession of any environmental studies on it. I'm not going to sit here at an EDC meeting and talk about what kind of contamination there might be, but it's
I'm just
probably
curious
safe
as
to
to the
assume that
cost.
there is some.
the cost to rehabilitate, reconstruct buildings in that district. I'm just curious if that was
Yeah, I mean, that would be part of it.
part of it, you know? that-
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, we could see a total redevelopment theoretically of Oakfield Center. We could see the Crest Motel area redeveloped. It's hard to prognosticate exactly what will happen over those years, but I hope to, over the next few years, to say, hey, we're getting our first project over there, or we're working with a specific property owner. 12 million, to be honest, with all these other costs, to me, that looks kind of low for redeveloping a bunch of properties over a period of 20 years. But to answer your question, yes, the gas station definitely would be part of that.
In order for anything to happen, that property has to be cleaned up. I mean, it could either continue on that way and continue to look that way and nobody will build around it, or it has to be addressed.
You know what, it has to be addressed.
Yep.
It's an eyesore and it's a blight. There's
Okay,
other
that's
properties there that are eyesores and blights besides that one, but that one's a good example.
I mean, this kind of makes me think back to, you know, those of us that have lived in Bartlett long enough, when I used to drive past what now is Brewster Creek, and none of that was there, you know, it really just was that vacant land, and look what it's contributing to the village now.
Yeah, now the EAV is pushing 100 million, and it's going to keep going up. There's more buildings, even though the TIF is over. Shifting gears, I mean, if you want to talk about a real successful TIF plan and a very successful TIF redevelopment area, I can't say, some of the people who called me, I told you about, thought that it was going to be similar to Brewster Creek, that we passed the TIF, next thing they know, there's going to be building after building after building going up. I said, that's not the way this one is going to work. This one's more of a long-term rehabilitate, clean up, hopefully some demolition, and then hopefully combining some of these sites together. Instead of a 1 acre thing here and a 1.5 acre thing here, it would be nice to see something more significant. So again, it's an estimate, but it's an estimate our TIF consultants came up with. To take an area right now that's worth about $5 million, and that brings me to my next slide. In a best case scenario, the EAV could increase up to $67 million. So a lot of times with TIFs, people are concerned with what they consider a loss of revenue, like other taxing districts, for instance. But without the TIF has something in it called a but-for argument. And I think we would all agree that it's been proven over there for many, many years. Without some type of public investment over there, there probably wouldn't be any significant private investment there. So we're looking at growing the tax base from 5 million to 67 million. So growth in annual property taxes from the entire area could, if that happens, could go from 500,000 up to 7 million. Again, over a period of 20 years. And really, I should have put an asterisk next to the 528K, because one of the biggest taxpayers, again, in there was supposed to be the gas station, with paying over $50,000 a year just on that property, and taxes haven't been paid on it for over 5 years. So that would be, 528,000 would be if everybody paid their tax bill. There's other delinquent tax bills in that TIF besides the gas station.
How does that usually end up being settled? How would you foresee that property, that gas station that's not paying their taxes for 5 years? How would you foresee that getting rectified somehow?
I wish I knew, but I think the logical answer is somebody at one point would have to not only foreclose on it, it's been in foreclosure, but to take possession of it. And we have a very experienced banker on our EDC, so I can say that banks are not in a big hurry to take possession of contaminated gas station properties. So how I see it playing out would be more years of pain, of sifting through it until somebody, one of the tax buyers maybe takes possession of it, or perhaps the bank. It's been foreclosed on already, but tax buyers also have the ability to foreclose on a property. So whoever ultimately comes into possession of that property, there will be a line of people.
With their hand out?
Yeah.
Now,
It might be a multi-million-dollar thing to redevelop
sure.
it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I probably am, but downtown, next to Associated Bank, that parking lot, which used to be Jim's Standard Station, I could be wrong, but I thought that was contaminated property, and I thought that it became a parking lot because it couldn't be used for anything else. Could that be the case with the gas station at Lake Street? Could that be demolished and just asphalted for a period of time?
You know, I suppose in theory that could be.
Instead of,
There are interestingly enough, I get calls from people who want to do a gas station over there. It's a great site.
Right.
And just if you drive by it and you see it empty and dilapidated, you go, what a good spot for a gas station. It's once they learn of all the hair on that site that people don't want to get involved with it. So to be honest, I think as the economic development guy here for the village, I think it has a lot more value than just being used as a parking lot. And I think eventually it probably will be another gas station, but it would have to go through that process. There might have to, it might end up being part of that $12 million in TIF funds.
right?
Right now, when the TIF is formed, there's zero in it, until somebody builds something or improves something and starts paying, a greater amount of taxes than currently exists. I don't want to get too far in front of this.
Sure.
Because probably anybody who develops in that area is going to ask or demand TIF funds.
Right.
So it could end up being over 12 million, but we have to come up with a budget and an estimate. It would be nice if that number was lower than the financing costs of it.
Right.
I had some questions while we're on that slide, actually,
This one or this one?
going through it.
Yeah.
Just a comment that I think the 28 million is crazy compared to the 12 and a half of actual costs. That's just an observation. But my question is for these types of TIFs. You're right, like TIFs are awesome, and clearly Blue Heron and Brewster Creek worked out well. Mm-hmm. If you compared it to other retail TIFs, do you find these more risky or anything? Because you get more sales tax out of it, right?
Yes.
But you also, if you do it at the wrong time, there is a risk associated, and that's the more direct comparison that I'd be asking about if I was doing this. So.
The answer to that is a strong yes. Riskier. The area is still in Cook County. So one thing about TIFs I want to remind you all of, it really doesn't affect the property tax bill that somebody pays within a TIF. If you build a restaurant that's going to have a $30,000 a year tax bill, in a TIF it's going to be $30,000, outside a TIF it's going to be $30,000. The difference is that your tax bill in a TIF will end up going into a TIF fund. So you could end up maybe with a redevelopment agreement with the village. You see that a lot, like I said, in the Daily Herald. Some project got X amount of TIF funds from some town. So you ask, yeah, I mean, you use the word riskier. I mean, it's still not easy to attract commercial and retail development to that area. And one of the things that I always say is that's kind of why it's a TIF also. If this was at the corner of 59 and Stearns, we wouldn't be talking about a bunch of disinvestment and empty buildings for 20 years. People would be clamoring to go over there. And as much as we like to work with our friends at Cook County, investing and doing some new commercial property in Cook County can be more challenging, especially for border communities like ours where you're close to DuPage or Kane County. So kind of long answer, but yes, it'll be, even with a TIF, it could be challenging, will be challenging to attract some commercial development to that area.
In a couple other meetings, I've heard about a cannabis dispensary in Bartlett. Would that be something that would entice people to invest in this corridor?
Yes, it could be. I will share with you tonight, we're working with one right now, but not for that area. But as luck would have it, you know, sometimes when you get one, there's still going to be enough room or interest. Somebody else expressed some interest also. And I did exactly mention that we're working on a new TIF for the Lake Street corridor. Of course, that could take a while.
Sure.
But also, that's a good point. It's the one that's looking is looking more on the 59 corridor. This is far enough that in my mind, it's a completely different trade area. So I wouldn't be too surprised to see a dispensary located in a strip retail or standalone center in that TIF at some point.
Does U46 have any stipulations on something like that, so close to a school?
They actually, I mean, I can't speak for them, but our village doesn't have a requirement for that. So, I mean, they would have the ability, like anybody else would, to come out and object. Mm-hmm. There's a special, it does require a special use, of course. Mm-hmm. So I would expect if somebody applied for that within 250 feet of the school, I would be surprised if somebody from U46 didn't come out to object.
Does the village have rights to object to anything? Like, can we say, sales tax producing only for the TIF, or can you kind of guide that?
We probably, I mean, the answer is, it's yes and no. And I'll tell you why yes and no. No, because at some point there's just going to be straight zoning on some of these sites. Like somebody might say, I'm going to build a strip center and it's going to have B3 zoning. So the B3 zoning would allow anything that you see in any of these retail centers, okay? It'll be chiropractors and pizza and, you know, haircut places. So that's the no. But the yes is when you enter into a redevelopment agreement. Like, let's say the village really wants to get some new restaurant concept that comes in, and they come in and they want some benefit from the TIF. When the village is engaging with an incentive with a developer or a business, gives the village leverage for stipulating different types of uses like that. So we're not going to say it can be sales tax producing only, because that probably is like more or less impossible in this day and age. But if somebody comes in and is like, we want to build a big sports bar or something like that, then the village can put on parameters of, you know, this could be allowed, that could be allowed. That's part of a special use permit usually, or a redevelopment agreement. Yeah, which is something, the village can do a redevelopment agreement without TIFs, but TIFs make it that much easier because there's increment involved, new taxes when somebody comes in and does a project like that. Shall I move on? Okay. I've kind of been over this already. Economic impact, new jobs, new tax revenue, improved infrastructure and quality of life and property values. That's what I do tell some of the homeowners who call me around there. Nobody in the world wants their taxes to go up, but people do like to have their property values high or increasing. And I tell them that, you know, a nice Lake Street corridor can maybe lift up the entire area a little bit more, increase property values and quality of life. The next steps this Friday. Okay, we had a joint review board meeting about a month ago, and joint review board is comprised of representatives of the major taxing districts within the TIF. Many of them felt they wanted or needed more time to review the TIF plans and to get some direction from their own boards. So the joint review board was continued to this Friday afternoon in this room at 2 o'clock will be the joint review board. And that entity makes a recommendation, a non-binding, similar to the EDC or the Planning and Zoning Commission makes a non-binding recommendation to the village board. The village board is going to hold a public hearing on August 20th, along with the results to say, here's what the joint review board recommended. And there's 3 ordinances involved to create a new tax increment financing district. And without beating those to death, they basically go to the assessor's office, and it gets the mechanism in order to freeze the, to create the base equalized assessed value and to create a TIF fund. So we're getting closer to the end of the TIF creation process than the beginning, and felt that it's important to keep the EDC U5 tonight up to date on what's going on with it, because we'll probably be talking about it for years. And I know I answered a lot of questions as we went along, and it's kind of a broad, I want to stress too, it's a broad plan. I can't, besides saying that we really would like to see for sure certain blighted, dilapidated properties like the gas station redeveloped, most of the rest of it has that flexibility to call it mixed use, predominantly commercial. Of course, that's what the village would want along the Lake Street corridor. You could drive for miles and miles and miles along Lake Street, particularly if you're heading east and you see nice commercial development. I used to drive frequently from Bartlett to Elmhurst along Lake, and you would see a lot of nice developments along the way. We want our area of town to look like that as well.
And one thing to mention, it's not just to incentivize businesses, it's for infrastructure too. It's pretty dark along that corridor. There's potential to use it for more lighting, triangle piece has no utilities hooked up to it. That's how we annexed them in. So we hook utilities up to it. So a lot of things in that. It's simply not just to bring businesses in, but it's also to improve the safety and aesthetics of that area.
Great comment.
Does Streamwood have any plan, so east of the eastern boundary of the TIF, is that Streamwood?
Yes.
Do they have any plans for developing that property at all, or you're not sure?
I mean, I'm going to say not that we're aware of. We haven't, I'm not going to say we don't collaborate with other communities, but we're only looking at our own stretch of Lake Street on this one. I know they have a mix of commercial and big industrial. When you head east that way, you see some automobile dealerships, and you see I forget the name of the salad company, the Fresh Express. You see a lot of, then you see some strip retail centers. They have kind of a mishmash of uses as well, but theirs is more fully, their area of Lake Street is more fully developed than Bartlett's.
Go back to the map. One thing, too, that's important not to look over when you look at that map is the potential for the Oak Street realignment in between areas C and F, making that particular intersection a four-way stop, which is 10 times more valuable to a developer than a non-four-way stop.
So funds from TIF would be used to do that street
Yes.
once you had the funds?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, wasn't that
Years
proposed,
away.
wasn't that proposed many times in years past?
It was.
TIF?
It was. I mean, I could probably talk about this TIF for a few more hours, but I would say that a lot of the reason that you haven't seen this area developed is because a lot of it is still owned by the state.
Right.
The state purchased properties, and the state, I'm going to use the word took properties. They sent letters to property owners, and they did eminent domain on quite a few properties in this area. So for many years, when developers called me about some portion of this, I would have to tell them, back in the days when you remember Jim Plonzinski was my boss, and I would ask him about it, and he would say, that's the state right-of-way where the Elgin O'Hare Expressway is going to be expanded into.
Right.
So a lot of times, I mean, nobody's going to touch something like that. And it's held up development in our town for way too long. And we just started engaging again with IDOT, which is, I'm just going to say, it's a bureaucracy and it's a state agency, trying to get them to back off of holding that land for future expansion forever.
So they still hold it?
Yes, we are working with them. I think,
Yeah, we've been speaking to them. Things are moving along.
yeah. Yeah,
At the pace of government.
at the pace of government, but we think that that area is going to be able to have development on it in the coming years.
Cool.
Yeah, but that's one
I
of the
think that
big impediments.
From a citizen, you used the word mishmash
Yes.
for the development east of there. I think as a citizen of Bartlett, I just hope that it's not a mishmash, you know, a strip shopping center and then something else. Because it's an image. When we talk about image for the village of Bartlett, I think that's one of our few corridors that reflects our image. Right now, it's.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
Which
not
water
gonna,
tower did we paint?
By the new fire station.
Oh,
you're not going to find anybody in this room disagree with that. I mean, we need to improve the image in that area. Yeah.
Are the highway signs, what do they call the big signs? that
The
are
billboards?
Billboards, is that, they staying
It's my
or are they
understanding
going?
they're going to stay in as part of the annexation agreement that we had with the property owner to come into the village.
Really?
Yes.
Any other questions for Tony?
I think it's great. I'm very happy that you guys have initiated this and are proactive and doing something about it. So, good job.
Thank you. I look forward to telling you at some point about something positive coming to that area.
I look forward to many more years of hearing about the Lake Street TIF.
Yes, they go for 23 years.
23 years, there we go. Time for another one. Is there any other new business?
Just had a question about the apartment complex, the proposed apartment building.
Yes, that went to the village board last Wednesday night in a special meeting that was held to address some requests made by the developer, specifically talking about different contracts for building it, whether or not they would be union or prevailing wage. And what the village board ultimately voted on was keeping the agreement as is. So did not waive some of the trades as being union. So that's the latest news on it, was just 5 days ago with the developer in here. And then the other part of the second vote was to continue the planned development for one more year. In other words, the zoning, the approval of the way the building looks and is laid out, and the parking lot and all that stuff, and that was extended for 1 year. And whether or not it's going to move forward remains to be seen.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions for Tony on new business, or Scott? All right, item 7.
Are there any other projects pending?
I think we've been over the big ones. I mean, we're still looking to attract a developer to 59 in West Bartlett Road. I've mentioned it's mostly, again, been fuel stations looking over there, but we're still marketing that site. The broker's still marketing it. We're making a return to the shopping center trade show next month. And I think that's probably the main and perhaps main property we're going to be promoting over there, hoping to get somebody interested in it. So, no, we've gone over all the big developments, basically, nothing else.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions for Tony or Scott? Okay, last item on the agenda is adjournment. Motion to adjourn. Bob, second.
A second.
All right, there we go. We are adjourned.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for showing up tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for showing up.